This week's theme on the Retirement Quick Tips podcast is an anatomy of a perfect credit score. Today, I'm talking about what it takes to get to a perfect 850 credit score. Now, I talked yesterday about a lot of this is vanity. Okay. Once you are above 760, it's good enough. You can stop. You don't need to go higher than this. And also, there is no precise formula for how to earn a perfect credit score, but it's also not an impossible code to crack either. So with that said, this is from FICO and Experian. So we're going directly to the source, and this is what they say are the common characteristics that consumers with a perfect 850 FICO score share. Okay, so a lot of these I've already talked about this week, but I think it's helpful to kind of pull it all together and to see what the actual key findings are. So the average, again, this is someone with a perfect 850 FICO score. If you look at a bunch of them all lined up together, this is what they look like on paper. Okay, so their average credit utilization ratio is 4%. Now the recommended amount is 30% or lower. So the lower this number is, the better. And what that means is that the most perfect credit scores is someone with a pretty high limit, but they're not using that much of it. So let's say you have multiple credit cards and you have total credit of $50,000. Well, 4% utilization means that at any given time, you're only using about $2,000 of that total limit. So again, lower is better here. And the average credit utilization, even though it's 30% or lower is what's recommended, the reality is that people who have a perfect credit score are much, much lower than that, 4%. All right, so next is total late payments on your credit report. Big fat goose egg. Okay, I talked about this earlier. This is the most important factor of your credit score. And the vast majority of people with very, very good credit, especially perfect credit scores, have actually never missed a payment. So always pay on time, never miss a payment, and we want that number to be 0. All right, next is the average age of your oldest credit account. For someone with a perfect credit score, it's 30 years. So most of you who are boomers and Gen Xers who are listening, you've had credit for years, decades in most cases. The longer you have those available or you have those credit accounts open, the more you're going to benefit from that because of the time you have this long established credit history. The average number of credit cards for someone with a perfect credit score, you might be surprised. I was a little bit. It's 6. So this goes back again to credit utilization. You have multiple cards. That allows you to get a higher limit. And if you're not even coming close to maxing out those cards, that's going to help you. Average credit card balance of someone with perfect FICO score is $2,500. Again, high credit limits, some balance is fine, low balance, usually paid in full. Now, some things that may surprise you a little bit. So credit score, having a perfect or very high credit score does not equal 0 debt. So actually, some people, I've famously heard Dave Ramsey talk about this. Like a lot of people with 0 debt don't have great credit score. Their credit's not terrible, but it's not as high as it could be either. And that's because they don't utilize a lot of debt. So it's kind of this, it's great to have a great credit score, but we don't want to pursue that and with the idea that, more debt is okay, because that's not necessarily the case. So the average auto loan balance of someone with perfect credit, $17,000. Average mortgage balance, $205,000. And the average personal loan balance is $33,000. Now, this surprised me a little bit because, again, people with perfect credit, they may not be in an ideal financial situation, still having debts. In this case, if you add up all these categories, we're looking at like $250,000 of debt across, not even counting credit card debt. And then, of course, we have collections accounts. Well, you're not in collections. That goes back to the late payments. That's 0. And then surprisingly as well, about 25% of people with a perfect credit score opened one or more new credit accounts in the last 12 months. So too much new credit, like if you have all these new credit or you're applying for credit cards all the time, that's bad. Not really a problem, I find. Younger people, I think that's more of a problem with. Older people who have been around the block a time or two aren't constantly applying for credit cards. So that may not be as much of a factor as you get a bit older, but occasionally opening a new credit card, taking on a new debt isn't necessarily going to ding your credit. And I think that's the important takeaway there. All right, that's it. That is the anatomy of a perfect credit score. Were you taking notes? low credit utilization, always paying on time, several different credit cards, long history, and debt is just fine. It is if you're pursuing a credit score. Now, it's not as simple as that, right? Because we want to try to minimize debt to the extent that that's possible to give yourself a lot more freedom and flexibility as you approach retirement. So I'm not necessarily in agreement of all these things, but hey, if you're just after that vanity 850 credit score, I've laid it out for you pretty well here. All right, that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Ashley Michike, and this is the Retirement Quick Tips Podcast.